Good morning. We continue the review and summary of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. We are in volume 3, page 1454. Actually, 1455 on top, I believe. Yeah, 1455 on top. We reached the top line of the next page. So what are we up? What are we learning? What are we up to? We're up to, after concluding a long discussion on Shema, which is what in the Shamas Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, what we say and contemplate on the divine unity, Hashem Echad, with passion and with pleasure, like dvash, divshi, my honey, which brings them to a v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, to love. And to help this along, it's preceded by the honeycomb, Yari, the forest of honey, which produces the honey, which is the malachim in Birchas Yetzer that we say before Shema. So the malachim serve as a siyu, as a support that help us along, that a support system that helps us and inspires and awakens and stimulates. So then he went back, after discussing a link, the malachim's role. And earlier, the role of the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, who are also our guides, and they educate us and inspire us. He now goes back to the mashal that he began all the way back in page 1352 of Riyas Ayin. Because ultimately, as we learned, the ultimate experience of Elikus, of reality, is when you see something that is so real to you as if you see it. So we could hear it, we could taste, touch, smell, but sight has a particular emes to it that resonates and the deepest level of pleasure, which is why, as we've discussed a number of times, La'asid Lave, Mashiach comes. So one of the things that's continuously a continuous theme is that we will see God, not just know it's there, not just be completely aware, but also an awareness that affects the sight. Just to use a few verses that the Alter Rebbe in chapter 36 in Tanya says, "V'nigla k'ed Hashem v'ro kol basar yachdov." The glory of Hashem will be revealed, v'ro kol basar, and all the flesh will see it. Ro, ayin ba'ayin yiro. We will see Hashem eye to eye. V'lo yikonef oid merecha v'hoyenecha reisas merecha. Your eyes will see the Master, and there no longer will be a garment that will conceal him or in some way diffuse. But and other verses that he brings, all emphasis on sight and on ayin, on the eye. So today, the physical eye, we see the physical world. And we have to come to, through intelligence, chacham eina bereshe, with the intelligence of our mind, to come to understand and perceive their deeper levels of reality. But la'ased lave, when it'll be a lakuz b'pshitus, and godliness will be totally apparent, it will be as real as if what we see today in the physical. And the physical will be seen as only a glove, only a keli, only a outer surface level. So that partially explains why he uses this mashal, Riyas Ayin. So the same thing, the neshama today sees, but only when there's a light that's shining. You need the Torah to illuminate for us that there's godliness. You need the malachim who help inspire us. Even though we don't see malachim, but when we contemplate them, it helps us get to that level. So bottom line is, we need that siyua, something outside to help us along. The ultimate goal, and one second, I should add, and even when that's taking place, it's still the eye that sees. It's not the light that sees. The light is shining and making the room or the environment a bright place, so now the eye can function properly. But it's the eye that sees, it's the neshama itself that experiences it. But we won't even need that outside siyua too. Ultimately, the neshama, once it's refined, the eye gets refined and the whole world is refined, then the eye itself will see with its own power. Okay, so this is summing up what we learned. So just like now, we need to have siyua, support, but then the eye itself sees. Same thing with neshama is in Aveda. When it comes on neshama beguf, it needs to receive from a siyua support from the malachim, which is the birchas yetzer, the yari that comes before the divshi, the forest, the trees, the what he called the honeycomb before the honey. And specifically due to the animal soul to affect bittul in the animal soul, we need to draw down from its source, root and source, which is the malachim. But the work itself is the neshama's work. Malachim offer support, but who's doing the work is the neshamas themselves. They do the power to be able to refine the animal soul through their contemplation. And the bittul malachim, it only pales a hazaza, like we said, only creates a shift, type of like a movement. It shakes up the animal soul, but the actual work is through the neshamas. And that's why the neshamas came down below to refine the animal soul, to refine this entire world. Dafka neshamas, because they come from such a high level, they can come down below. And the so is true regarding the soul itself. It's aveda of ava b'tainugim, like we learned that va'hafta is the ultimate ava with pleasure, like sweetness. That also comes with the power of the neshama itself. That the neshama has the capacity to see, but he says, to gaze at the beauty of the king. And the same thing with the avara b'chol meidecha b'li gvul all b'keich neshama. And that's because the neshamas are rooted in Atzilus, and in the root of roots, they're rooted in Atzmus and Sof. That's why they have this power. That's why they have this tremendous, powerful love, which is higher than just rational love, and a level of Riyah in Elokus. And that's why they're the level of what he calls the pupil of the eye, Ishen Einai, which we learned back on page 1410, 1411. The pupil of the eye, the ayin of Atik. And that also packs the shtalshlus, Ein Hashem El Yireyav. And again, what they receive from the malachim is only a support. Because be'etzem, the shamas are like the etzem krei chariya, they have the very power of sight. But when they come down below, they need that support to help illuminate and help inspire and help ignite that very light that's within them in their core inherent self. That's where we stopped on top of page 1455. And now we'll continue. Just wanted to add one more point back to what I spoke about Yari and Divshi, the forest and the honey. So I misspoke. I said I didn't find it in the verses. I did find it actually. And it would slip my mind. And when we learned it the first time, I actually elaborated on it. So in the book of Shmuel, Aleph, in Tanakh, Shmuel Aleph, at the end of chapter 14, he talks, there's a whole story there about how King Saul, Shaul HaMelech, tells his people that were going to war that they shouldn't eat, but his son did not hear that command. And the pasuk talks how he dipped his stick into the honey in the forest. And there he talks about honey in the forest. So that's the original source for it. The Gemara in Shabbos 95a, Tzadik Hey Amar Aleph, actually asked the question, Achalti Yari Im Divshi, what does a forest have to do with honey? There he's asking it more in a halachic way. And there he answers, because he's coming to teach us that on Shabbos you're not allowed to pick honey from a honeycomb. And the comparison is like a forest of trees, just like you're not allowed to pick fruit from a tree, you're not allowed to pick honey from a honeycomb. But practically, it's still what we learned is obviously that there's honey that comes from these trees, certain trees, their sap, as we discussed more at length yesterday. Just wanted to add these sources, more detail a bit about this topic. Okay. With that said, let's go back now to the top of 1455, and he's going to continue with this mashal of Eir Hariyah. Again, the eye that sees. Today, the eye sees only with the support of outside light, and it has its limitations how much it can see. But ultimately, the neshama itself is able to see, and it itself has that power. But as I said, in a dark world, the neshama needs the support of malachim. Earlier, we learned also of the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders of the people of the community. So now, line 2 on page 1455, the pages can be found at Ayin Beis.com. He says, Hine. And now, this barley ill, it was explained earlier. This is on page 1364. So quite a while back. The hamoshel de erariya who b'chinas malchus da'asiyah. I mentioned it yesterday, that there are 3 levels of makabel. Mashpia, the moshel for mashpia zah in the spheres is shemesh, is the sun. The sun was created that gives off light. It does not need to receive light from any source. Obviously, it receives light from God. But once God created it as a luminary that gives off light. Yeah, but then there's makabel, and 3 levels of makabel. The moonlight. The moon does not have, even though the moon is called a moyer, but especially after its diminishment, and even before the diminishment, we actually learned, the moon receives its light through the sun. So that's one level. That's called Malchus of Bria, Malchus of Atzilus as it manifests in Bria. The second is a luminous stone, stones that glow. They too receive their light from the sun, from the stars we learned, but they retain it to some extent. And that he called Malchus of Atzilus as it manifests in Malchus of Yetzirah. And the third is Eir Hariyah. Eir Hariyah does not have any light of its own today. It needs an outside light. And he says, what we learned is that that's the level of Malchus Da'asiyah. And yet, because it comes down so low in Asiyah, the Yesh B'Zegili Eir Elyon Yesem Mi'Be'elam Abriya. It has in it even a higher light, a higher radiant, a higher light than even the one in Elam Habriya. Hainu, canal. That's what he said there. In other words, because Hainu, canal, and how do we explain that? So he says, like we learned before. So neshama above in Giluyim, from a revelatory point of view, from revelation point of view, the neshama above has more light. It's when it comes down below, it's more concealed. There's more light in Atzilus than there is in Bria, Yitzir, and Asiyah. When it comes down below, Lamatov and Istapsha Beguva Nefesh Abamis, and it manifests in a body and an animal soul, which is already in Asiyah, so there's less revealed light. However, as we're going to learn, it's dafka there in the darkness of this world, the neshama's efforts and exertion will reveal even higher levels, like we said before, that a neshama can only come down below because it's rooted in such a high level. However, it's concealed initially. It's like the general concept where it says, Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, God desires a home in the lowest of worlds. It means the lowest because in Revelation is the lowest of worlds. This world, the divine is concealed. In Atzilus, Elokus is revealed. And yet it's dafka here that Atzmus wants to have a home. And the same thing, the neshama yafasha achas b'tshuva ma'asim tevim be'elam hazim ekol chaya elam haba, the Mishnah says. 1 hour of tshuva and good deeds in this world is worth more than the whole world to come. Ekol chaya elam haba. That's a very powerful statement. Then the Mishnah says, Yofasha achash al kedas ruach be'elam haba mekol chaya elam hazeh. 1 hour of pleasure in the world to come is greater than all the pleasures of this world. So which one is it? Sounds like a contradiction. The answer is not. If you're talking about pleasure, giluyim, what we call nachas ruach, nivra, our pleasure, of course there's more pleasure in the world to come than there is in this world. In this world, there's a lot of pain, and many things are concealed. But if you talk about Yofar Achaz B'tshuva, Yofar Achaz, not Kedas Ruach, what's more pleasure for God? The Kavanah, 1 hour in this world is worth more than the whole Elam Haba. So you're talking about revelations, of course, are greater in the higher worlds. But if you're talking about Etzema Kavanah, the very intention is dafka down here. That's what he's going to be explaining here. So therefore, the Koyach Hariyah, which is an Asiyah, in Malchus of Asiyah, at the end of the day, though it's lower than the moon and the luminous stone of Bria and Yetzirah, respectively, but it's rooted much higher, and that's why it itself sees. And the Etzem Koyach Hariyah, it doesn't need any source of light. It itself is a source of light, ultimately. However, today it needs that support, and it needs something to get it going, to so-called to trigger it and motivate it. So that's what he's going to be explaining now. So he says, "Va'inyanhu," and the inyan of this is like this. Here's how it works. So we're going back to the pasuk Yosef Avenu, that you shaped us like the pupil of his. God shaped us like the pupil of his eye. So he says, "Hine ishena ayin," the pupil itself of the eye. What color is it? It's black. Hu hashachar shebayin. That's the dark part of the eye. That's the pupil. The white part is not called Eishen Einai. So it's interesting is that dafke, the dark, is what's called the pupil, the very pupil, the essence of the eye. Why? The ikar aliyah hu mashachar shebayin dafke. In physical sight, the primary sight comes through the pupil. You take away, God forbid, the pupil, there'd be too much light. The pupil is what regulates how much light enters into your eye. That's why the pupil dilates in light and it expands in dark. So the pupil is like a focus. I mean, the camera that we've invented is shaped like the eye for that reason. So it's the pupil that the eye, that's the ikar hariyah. Ukadisa b'medrash Rabbah emer, Parsha Lamed Aleph, like it says in Medrash Rabbah, Parsha Lamed Emer, Hagalgal hazeh shel ayin ein odem reya mitech halovan sheyesh bei ela mitech hashachar. This galgal, this sphere called the eye, the person does not see through the white part of the eye, tech halovan, that's white, ela mitech hashachar, but from the dark. So here you have an interesting paradox. That dafke dark brings us to see more than the white part, than the light part. From darkness, I've created for you light. That's the medrash. Now, what does that mean in a deeper level, in a spiritual level? V'hainu, is galus hakeiches asrim neshama ha'idei nefesh habamis. In Aveda means the neshama has tremendous resources. But in the higher worlds, the neshama's resources are, the real core resources are concealed. What's revealed is the revelations of the neshama. Like it is with all challenges. When do we see how strong somebody is? Only when they're challenged. So it's dafke, the keiches atzmiv of the neshama, the core faculties, the core powers and resources of the soul are revealed dafke through the animal soul, when there's resistance. Examples are given for this. For example, Chassidus gives an example of a dam. Water is running in a river. So it has a certain amount of power. But if you put up a dam that blocks the water and stops the water from flowing, what happens? The water starts building up more and more and more. The pressure becomes enormous to the point that you can literally, it literally can ultimately break through the dam. So what causes pressure is dafka, the resistance, the block, the darkness, as he calls it here, is what drew out this tremendous power. Or as we like to say, that we're like a tea bag, you don't know how strong you are until you put into hot water. Or the expression of the Gemara that an olive produces oil when you press it. So pressure And in this context, the challenges of the animal soul is what brings out these deeper strengths of the neshama. So this is now an additional point that he has not made till now. Till now, he was talking about the soul coming down and being concealed, and it needs an outside light to get it going. But now he's saying the very descent of the soul down below helps bring out from the neshama a tremendous resource. Dihine, haneshama, because now he's going to explain this further. The neshama sharsha ma'atzmus ein sof. As we learned earlier, the neshama is rooted all the way in Atzmus ein sof, the highest levels. Dihi elokuz be'etzem mitziyusa. And the neshama is divine in its very core existence. When you say the world, rest of the creations of the world, a stone, a plant, an animal, malachim even, we learned earlier nivroim. They're created by Hashem. And therefore, their whole existence is divine energy. But you don't say they have a divine personality. Like you say, let's say, a child of a parent. The child has the very DNA and the genes of the parent. A neshama has in it, Hashem implanted in it by Yipach Ba'apav Nishmas Chaim Elokus. That's what a neshama is be'etzem. U'kamosh is barli il ba'erech, as was discussed earlier at length. We learned this at length earlier. U'lechena neshama dafke. That's why the neshama, only the neshama, has the power. Yardo levader l'sakan nefesh habamis, descends to refine and repair and improve. Could say to separate or to refine the animal soul, mepneshu atzmius, because the neshama is a core entity. And if you want to give a job to someone, such a difficult job to transform an animal soul that has its own self-interest in its own material survival and so on, you need to give it to someone to an entity that has tremendous power, because everything else would not have the ability to contend to fight with the animal soul. But neshama, because it has atzmizdika powers, that's why it's sent down to this world to achieve that. And that's due to the fact because the neshama is the core of Elokus, the Elokus be'etzem. So two things he's saying. It's the Atzmus of Elokus, the very core of Elokus, not just a creation of Elokus, but at the very core, and it's Elokus be'etzem. The neshama itself is divine. So it's rooted in Atzmus Elokus, and the neshama itself is Elokus be'etzem. Al-kain be'keche v'yecholta. That's why it's in its power and in its capacity. The sakan and nefesh habamis, to repair and refine the animal soul, b'chol hadvorim atachtenim, and all the physical objects of this lowest of worlds. She'ein zeh b'keich hamalachim. This is not the power of angels. Shem nivroim levad, who are only creations. Yes, they're sublime creations, they're divine creations, and they have a connection and an awareness of godliness. But at the end of the day, like we said, they're bria, they're creations, and the neshama has this alakus element in it. And because of this, the neshama has the power lishtaba begufa de malka, to bind itself and be absorbed in the body of the king himself. With great love and with a love of pleasures, as we learned earlier, due to its root and source. So all this is all about the neshama as it is fundamentally. But you still have to discuss how do we bring it forth, which he didn't explain yet. He just said this is what the neshama is, and that's why it comes down below. It's the only thing that has the power to transform this world. Shezeu ikar mitziyusa. And this is the primary mitzias of the neshama. This is important to add. Because you could say, okay, the neshama has the salakus, but it also has other elements. He says, no. Even as the neshama comes down below, its ikar mitzias is being rooted in atzmus of elikus, the core of elikus, and it itself is what he calls elikus be'etzem. V'lo nishtan is be'etzem mahusa. And even in its journey down below, We learned this also earlier. Even as the neshama assumes the properties and will ultimately end up inside of a body and an animal soul, and it engages with them, and it's affected by them. That's why it needs the siyua in the first place, the support. But even then, be'etzem uhusa, gambi ridosa b'ishtalshlus, even as the soul descends into the cosmic order, it does not change its etzem uhus. However, that doesn't mean it's not concealed. So a person could remain, you could have a musical prodigy, even if you don't see it, or for whatever reason they're in prison or someone is not letting them play music, that doesn't mean they lost their skills. It just means that there are outside forces at work that are trapping, so to speak, and holding hostage that powerful energy. But at the same time, the neshama has that energy, and therefore it has the power to transform the world. And we see it. We have transformed this world, no matter how dark it is. However, all these powerful resources in the neshama are concealed in the neshama as it comes down below. As a matter of fact, I should add, it's not only concealed below, it's also concealed above. Because we said above, the neshama is begilui, has tremendous. The neshama in the higher worlds is more revealed, but the etzem of the neshama is not necessarily revealed. It only will be revealed in the darkness of this world, as we'll soon learn. And the way the neshama is above, before it comes down below in a body and an animal soul into tachtenim. Hagamshi b'hasoga gdela belakus. Even though it has a tremendous comprehension of godliness and it has a tremendous level of love and reverence, because it doesn't have the impediments of the body. So you can imagine the neshama has hasoga nalakus, a high level, hasoga gdela, and avavira, makom mokam ein bo b'chinas avarabba v'abba tanugim. This is a key point that we've not learned yet. But avarabba, when we say ava b'chol meidecha, and ava b'tainugim, the love with pleasures, the neshama above does not have. Because that can only come from the darkness of the eye, as we're going to learn in a moment. That only comes from the resistance of the animal soul. So here's the big chiddush here that we have not learned yet. Till now we've learned about the neshama retaining its personality, even when it's concealed. The siyua it receives from malachim, earlier from the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, our teachers, our educators, even from Torah their mitzvah, as I've explained, even though he didn't discuss it specifically. He did speak about Torah, that Torah directs and guides us. That's what we learned. And we need that siyua because down below, it's dark, and I cannot see in the dark. Now he's adding something tremendous, that the very darkness adds a powerful element here. The darkness is what that resistance and that concealment propels the neshama, like all challenges, to bring out its deepest powers. That those deepest powers that the neshama has, l'mayla the neshama, there's no resistance. As the mashal goes many times, that the child in the king's palace has all the delights. Neshamas learn Torah all day in Gan Eden, in the higher worlds. They have avavira, and that's that. It's only down below because of the challenges of life that the neshama, with the siyua of the malachim and Torah and so on, is catapulted, as propelled to a completely new level, where it reaches avarabba and avabetanugim. V'haraya, and the proof for that is shahari neshamas l'mayla afilu neshamas tatzilas hemuruchakim ma'akav. So he's now quoting a statement that I think is in Ageres Akedah Siman Chaf and other places. Because in the Neshamas Lamaila, we say they're distant from the Kav. What is the Kav? The Kav is the ray of light that comes after the Tzimtzum. And that ray of light creates the worlds. Ak, Akudim, Nekudim, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya. Neshamas, it says, Misham Yotzu v'nifradu in Ageres Akedah 20. He says, Neshamas have to separate from the Kav, because they have to come down below. If they remain then like Torah never enters into a body. It comes down to this world, but it always remains Torah. the neshamas have to come down into a body. So in Kabbalistic and Hasidic terminology, it's called meruchakim mahakav. They're distant from the kav, even l'mayla. Like when you take Eris and Kalim of Atzilus, for example, the Eris and Kalim of Atzilus remain intact. Then the Eris and Kalim come into Bria, so there they become a little more separate. But a neshama has a specific role. It has to come all the way down below into a body, into an animal soul, into this physical world, has to engage with the world, and it's affected by all of that. And the neshama's in Golas down below. And God forbid, when a person sins or transgresses, it affects the neshama too. The neshama is concealed, at least for that moment. But it's only because the neshama has such tremendous power that it could make it and come down below. And more importantly, through Avodah of Shema, with the siyu of the Malachim, Birchus Yetzer, and so on, that the neshama could overpower these challenges and actually transform even the animal soul and the body and the physical world into loving God. But that's only because it came down to a dark place and there's that resistance that brought out these deepest resources, like the examples I gave before with the dam, with the olive. That pressure is what pressure and resistance and challenges bring out the deepest strengths. Or like he puts it here, that the dark of the eye is what we see through the pupil of the eye. So the neshamas are called ishenene, like he's going to soon conclude here. But it's dafka the dark, because the dark brings out the greatest light of all. Like we say, Yisur Na'er Min HaCheshach, that the quality of light that comes from darkness is much deeper than light, than regular light. I'm just going to skip the parentheses for a moment because I want to finish the paragraph and then I'll go back. The parentheses is a question the Rebbe Rashab throws in here, but I want to confuse matters. So after the parentheses, he says, and through the refinement of the animal soul, what's revealed in the neshama? Something that does not happen in the higher worlds. As much as the Hasoga Gdela, the neshama's comprehension of godliness, and its avaviras in the higher worlds, but it does not have a nefesh habamis to deal with. Is dafkid in refining the nefesh habamis is revealed in the neshama b'chinas keiches ha'atzmim, its core powers. Like it is in any situation, only when there's a challenge, when there's a resistance, when there's a competition, something that pushes back, that brings out the deeper faculties, in this case, the Atzmim Shalah, Keiches Atzmim Shalah, to the point that we call it great love, tremendous love, and Ava B'Tainugim, with Tainug. So it's Dafka the darkness that brings out this greatest power in the neshama, which is what he said before, that Dafka Ishen Ene, the dark part of the eye, the pupil, is the main part of what allows us to see, like he brought from the Medrash, not the white part of the eye. And now, the next pages, he's going to explain this at length. From Ubira Ayin, the next paragraph, through, literally, let's see here. It almost always, all the way till the bottom of 1462. So the next 7 pages is dedicated to explaining how Dafka the darkness, Shchera, like he's going to say, the darkness brings out the greatest beauty. So it's a whole other dimension that's being added here, that's more than just what we've learned till now. Now, of course, we need the siyua of the malachim, the siyua of other resources that help us. But as he keeps emphasizing, it's the neshama itself that does the work. So as much support that we have, it's the neshama that does the work, and the resistance in this dark world and the challenges bring out these deepest faculties. That's what he really added now in this section that we just learned. First half of the page here on page 1455. Like I said, the next 7 pages are dedicated to explaining that. Okay, I'll do the parentheses, but I'll do that after if anyone wants to ask any questions. Then I'll do the parentheses where the Rebbe Rashab wants to talk about the Neshamas Lamaila and Lamata from Tanya. He has a question that he's going to ask on this, but let me stop here for any questions if anyone wants to ask anything. Okay. No questions? So now he says like this. I'll do the parentheses. It says v'tzarich, what we just said, that the neshamas lamayla in giluyim, they have, obviously they're more revealed than they are below. But the keiches atzmim adafke lamato, because that's the resistance. The concealment itself brings out these deeper strengths. But lamayla, like he said, neshamas lamayla meruchakim min makav. That's the expression. They're distant the kav. So think of the kav as a ray of light. Let's call it a main line. Think of a main electric line. So anything that is part of the kav obviously has tremendous, intense light. But since a neshama is going to have to go through a metamorphosis and a process of entering a body, even though it retains fundamentally its connection and its divine personality, like we say, neshama shenasata b'tahidahi, even down below, but on a gilui level, it has to move away from the main line of electricity. It has to go into, let's call it, to the appliances, with the main appliance being the body and the animal soul and the other appliances of this world. So if electricity was still connected to the main line, it would blow all the circuits and wouldn't have the ability to really engage and be involved with the affairs of this world. So that's why it's meruchak min akav. That's what the language is. In other words, it's still receiving light, obviously, and it actually comes from the highest levels. But on a technical level, it's like when we say a person goes on shlichus. So to go on shlichus, you have to go away from the Rebbe, physically. Because you're in the presence of the Rebbe, the light of the Rebbe. That's not your shlichus. The shlichus is to go to distant places. Yes, you go with the power and you retain the energy, and your job is to bring all that power to the distant places, but you have to be distant from it. You have to go meruchik min akav. If you stay within the framework of the very light, then you're not going to achieve the goal of illuminating the dark world around us. So now he qualifies. He asks a question. The Tzarechiyun. Tzarechiyun is actually a question. Tzarechiyun is usually a strong question. We need, Tzarechiyun literally means we need iyun, an in-depth analysis, if you wish. We need to, an in-depth review, analysis would be a good word. But it's usually used when there's a question. So Tzarechiyun, you'll find many times, the Rebbe for sure, when he writes sometimes something, at the end he writes with Tzarechiyun, which means there's still something that's not clear here, that needs more elaboration. Sometimes he writes Tzarechiyun Ktsas, it needs a little iyun. Sometimes Tzarechiyun Gadol, great iyun. So there's many different expressions you find. So he says, V'Tzarechiyun, from what it says, Mamashakosah b'Sefer Shal Bein in Perek Lamed Zayin. So in Tanya, chapter 37, he says there that when a neshama comes down below, obviously its tremendous light that was there above in Gan Eden gets diminished, gets concealed. Not the koiches atzmim, because they're for sure concealed, but those giluyim get concealed. And he says, even tzaddikim, not just Rosh V'Tevlei or Beinani, but even tzaddikim, lo yagil l'maylas bekusei b'Hashem. Down below, they cannot reach the same level of dveikus, of cleaving and bonding to Hashem as they are above, because they also come down into our body. Yes, it's true that the body, and maybe there's no animal soul in a tzaddik even, but nevertheless, once they come down, they can't reach the same level of dveikus. So this seems to pose a question here. He's saying here, you're right. The neshama is meruchak min akav and the giluyim, but what it receives below is something much greater. It comes to ava rabba and ava b'tainugim, and l'shtaba beguf de malka, and to bind itself with the guf of the melech dafke below. So how is that reconciled with what he says in Tanya, that down below the neshama cannot reach that level of dveikus? So the Rebbe Rashab explains, but Sorech Lemer, so you have to say that even when we say that there's more dveikus above than there is below, that's dveikus. The Mekom Mokem Ein Ze'in in the Shtaba Begufet de Malka. It doesn't say in Tanya that the neshama reaches its etzem in the higher worlds, or reaches the ability to be absorbed or bound to the guf of the malka. It says the dveikus b'Hashem, shezeh nasa be'elam hazeh dafke. L'shtaba b'guf of the malka, to connect to Atzmus, that's only down below. So what the Tanya is saying, when it comes to giluyim, dveikus b'Hashem, yeah, of course. In this material world, even a tzaddik has to eat, sleep, and in some ways is engaging with this material world, and it's not the same level of dveikus in giluyim. But l'shtaba b'guf of the malka is dafke ne'elam hazeh. Ayin Beis, he's telling us to look at Likutei Torah, Dibra Maschil b'Midbar Sinai be'Oyel Moed. In the Maimer b'Midbar Sinai be'Oyel Moed, where apparently he discusses that, what happens when the neshama down lamata. I'd have to look up to see exactly what it says there, but I think I even discussed it last time when we learned it the first time around. But that's the addition in the parentheses. And that's what he says, through the bir of the nefesh habamis, keiches atzmim. So basically, think of it like three levels. Neshama rooted in Atzmus, that's where it all originates from. The neshama then comes down in the higher worlds in Atzilus. It's in a state of high dveikus, like we said here, or in Gan Eden, understanding godliness, love and reverence. It comes down below, that's concealed, and you can't reach this, and you don't reach the level of dveikus that you do in Gan Eden, but something else now comes into play. That gili of the etzem neshama, that was never revealed before. It's just the neshama has it within it because it's rooted there. Where does that manifest? Where does that express? Dafke, when the neshama is faced with the difficulties of a corrupt world, of a challenging world, like we say about Yaakov. Where did he build his family? In the darkest place, in Charan, Charein Afshal Mokim, God's wrath with Lavan. That's where he built his family. Besides Binyamin, all the children, all the Shvatim were born in Charan and Chutz La'aretz. Even though it says, Vayetze Yaakov Be'er Sheva. Be'er Sheva is like Gan Eden, the fountain of seven. There's seven midas. Vayelech Charana is already going into a world, a dark world called Charana, a world on earth. And I'm specifically using Yaakov because Yaakov is the one that has the dream. V'hinei sulam mutzav arza. He sees a ladder where? On the ground. And it's through his davening and through the davening from below that elevates everything in existence, including the angels for that matter. And that is dafkin down into this world. And this is the general rule that we always talk about, dira b'tachtenim. Like he says in Tanya chapter 36, the chapter before this one that we just quoted. It's tachtenim. It's the lowest of worlds, this world. It says it clearly. What means tachtenim? Not in space. He says in Gilead Likus, it's the lowest, the darkest world. It's darker than all other world. Tachten she'ein tacht lematim menu. Nothing lower than this world. To the point it's cheshach kafla mechupul, a quadruple darkness. And mole klippas v'sitra achre, filled with klippas, shells and husks. And the other side that dominates. Rishayim gevrim bay. You see the wicked prosper and dominate. And the tzaddikim and righteous people suffer. So it couldn't be darker than that. To the point that the world cries out, Aniva afsied. Me and nothing else. The exact opposite of the truth. Eined movade is the truth. There's nothing but God. This world, look around. The Yesh is always saying, me and nothing else. I'm the center of existence. Everything orbits around me. The selfish gene. And dafka there, tachtenim, that's where Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu, that God, Atzmus itself, desired to have a home there. Not in Gan Eden, not in Atzilus, not in the higher world, not in the Kav, dafka in this lowest of worlds. So that's the paradox here. Where's Atzmus revealed? Dafka in tachtenim. Like he says, the higher worlds, they reveal God's revelations, Giluyim, like we learned earlier about Oyer. They reveal Oyer. But you want Etzem, the Atzmus of Yesha Miti, that's beyond the Oyer. The Atzmus that is built to Metzias Nimtza, that is Metziusim Atzmusim, Mechuyev HaMetzias, that's beyond all revelations, that's Dafka down below. He doesn't bring that right here, but it's the same concept. Here he's talking about the context of the Neshama, that the Etzem HaNeshama where it's rooted, what we spoke, Helama Atzmi, Shmoya Atzmi, Shmoy Kodim Kikadmuse, the highest levels in the Esem. That's dafka when the neshama comes down below, not above. You don't have any revelation of that until the neshama comes down below, because where it's rooted there, but it's not apparent and it's not manifest, because the only thing that manifests there is Atzmus, and it's all lifnei atzimtzum and so on. It's only after all the levels, and you go down to the lowest level, the lowest reveals the highest. Like we learned in the Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe, Seif Meisim b'machshava tchila, not Seifim b'tchilasan, that the Seif Meisim, the end of the action, is rooted in the beginning of the thought. The beginning is wedged in the end, and the different expressions that capture this idea. Just to elaborate a bit more. And that's what he's saying here. So this is like really the final piece when you think about the whole picture. The Neshama comes down below, Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. Yes, it has the support of Ner Mitzvah and Teira Eir and Einei Ha'eda and the Malachim, as we learned. But ultimately, it's the Neshama itself, through its hard work, that achieves the ultimate goals, and especially the challenges. That's what catapults and propels the Neshama to reveal down below the Keiches Atzmim, as it's rooted in Atzmus Mamish. And then, when the Neshama reaches that, then it's Mashpia into all the Giluyim, into Malachim, like we learned, the Malachim are elevated. Teira is even elevated. It's Mamshech Atzmus into Teira. Like we learned earlier, the Neshama is below, Teira is higher than the Neshamas. But the Neshama, but once the Neshama reaches the Atzmus, then it's higher than Teira, and it's Mashpia into Teira, which we learned more at length earlier, which I'll refer to as we go along, because that's part of the bigger picture here. Okay. With that, we finish this paragraph on page 1455. And obviously, I'm also include all of this that I just discussed. You can see it more if you want to read it. You can read it all in my essay, where I lay it all out in more detail. Yeah.
That was beautiful, Rabbi. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you want about Neshamas and Teira that I just mentioned, that's on page 1403 and 1404. 1403 and on, for a good few pages there. Thank you for your kind words,
Rabbi. It's not the first time I'm hearing that theme. I'm sure for most in the class say the same, but I'm curious to know if there is if one or two famous mimerim that are sort of almost like exclusively devoted to that. Not just a sentence here or a sentence there, but like the soliloquy, if you will, or I don't know what to call, little lecture you just gave. Are there any, is there any fundamental mimerim that really go into that deeply?
I would say right here, Ayin Beis is probably the most.
Okay.
There are mimerim that talk about it. You have to go through different indexes, or to say for Likutim or other places that. When this Ayin Beis will come out with footnotes, I'm sure they'll have cross references. But I don't. But from my learning, I think Ayin Beis probably is more thorough than anywhere I've ever seen it.
So it's just such a critical message, and yes, it is kind of sprinkled throughout Chassidus, I think. But it's essentially.
I can mention now 10 Maimorim that talk about it. There's many Maimorim that talk about this, but we are learning maybe the one that is bringing it all together. So you just want it for like a bibliography, or do you know? I mean,
no, whenever.
Most of what it says anywhere, Ayin Beis, as I said, is the probably most thorough place where he brings together all the pieces because of its length. And I just quoted those pages. I mean. And also, when you say this, what do you mean this? About Torah and Neshamas that I just talked about? Or you're talking about in general? When you said this, which part that I mentioned?
The part that essentially, you could even say the purpose of the mission of the Neshama, our lives. is to
starts
come
from top.
down here and to be mavar and mezachech, to rectify, to purify the
Yeah, so the first place you begin is chapter 36 in Tanya. That's the first place in Chassidus Chabad. And if you go through all of Tanya, it talks about the neshama coming into the body and animal soul to refine it. That's the whole kavanah. That's so. If you want to
but the
start from the
notion,
beginning, I would start with
yeah,
Tanya.
of course, sure. Thank you for that. Suggestion. The notion that one can actually get closest to Atzmus here in this lowest of worlds, I guess that to me is like the core of it, because that's essentially I don't know, the tachlis.
Well,
Of course.
I don't know how many with my moram would you say chassidus you've learned so far in your life?
Oh, 80, 100, 80, 90, 100. I don't know,
Okay,
something.
well, I think the more you learn, you'll see it's going to be almost everywhere.
Yeah.
But there's some places it's discussed more directly, some places more in passing. But the undercurrent is, yes, remember, Nisava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyis Leis Baruch Dira B'Tachtenim. It all begins.
Of course.
Why did God create existence? So chapter 36 in Tanya is probably the first and the most, the first of all places in Chassidus Chabad, at least, that is discussed. But if you really go back, you can also say is the central theme of Judaism. God sends a neshama down below to build a mishkan for him. So even it's not even chassidus. The whole Torah is really about that. Or I mentioned the Mishnah Yofa Sha'achas B'Tshuva Mais Teilim Ba'Elam Hazam Kol Chayil Elam Haba. So there, though it's not in the language of purpose, but it's also saying 1 hour of Torah mitzvahs in this world. Anyway, so yes, it's a very broad theme. You're going to find it practically in almost any mimer, and if you really look, you'll find that in every reference in Judaism ultimately comes back to that. Every mitzvah, everything we do, why Hashem gave Matan Torah dafka to earth. Why when the Malachim said, leave the Torah with us, Hashem said, no, I'm giving it down below.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm talking now basic Judaism now, not even Chassidus.
Well, it occurred to me, maybe because we're at this part of Ayin Beis. By the way, I excluded Ayin Beis from my count because this is one hemshach of Maimer. You add this together, it's probably double or triple or maybe more than
Yeah.
double.
No, I was just wondering
Yeah, yeah,
the breadth of what you've covered
yeah.
so far.
It
But
occurred to me, and please let me know if this resonates with you. I get asked this a lot too by my, let's say, less knowledgeable friends in the Jewish community. Why would the Abishter set up Adam and Chava and Gan Eden and give them a perfect, idyllic, utopian place to live, and then tempt them as he did, and then essentially knowing, kind of, because he knows it all. That means, I mean, God knows it all. That they're going to fail the test, and they're going to be banished from that utopian world, and they're going to have to bizyata pecha, etc., and all the tsuras and pains of life in this physical world. So it occurred to me that and maybe this is obvious, I'm sure it's obvious to you, but that's the way our reality is structured. In a sense, it would have been nice if they passed the test, but we wouldn't be the way we are here now, probably not. I don't think. And the whole purpose of our lives would not have been, the mission would not have been stated had they not failed. So essentially, the Abraham set up this, it's not a mushal, it happened, but he set up this precedent, if you will, for, this is our deepest ancestors. This is what's in us, and this is what happens when we don't follow what Ratzon Hashem, what God wants you to do. But that doesn't mean that you're off, you're gone for good, like that you're good for nothing. It means you've got a lot of work to do, and then that's the whole purpose of your life is to be rectifying both yourself internally, your midos, and et cetera, and increasing your knowledge, et cetera, and then of course peripherally to the rest of the world. It's like maybe because we're in this part of Ayin Beis, I went back to the creation story, if you will, whatever, and it seems to me that is like a mission statement where you can see all of the themes that we've been talking about. You can see how that that experience in Gan Eden and the fall or whatever pre Eitzadas Tovara, that essentially defines the human condition, if you will. Did that resonate with you?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, let me put it to you this way. I would tell your friends, if they really are sincere with their question, and I hope they are, that's why they should learn. That's when you learn Chassidus, you get the answer to that question and to many other questions. To me, the question is much broader than about the Adam and Eve. Why did he put us in this world? You and I, knowing fully well that we're going to make mistakes and we have free will, and not just knowing, look, human beings have made many mistakes. There's no person that hasn't. So I think the question is, why are we here? That's the real question. Not why God put Adam and Chava with a test and then knowing they may fail the test. I want to comment on that as well, but it's all of us. Why did he create a world where we have free will and we can make mistakes and we can hurt each other? And what's the purpose of it all? So this is why you learn Torah and Chassidus, to understand that very question. Adam and Chava are just the first, but we're all in the same situation. We all have our tree of knowledge that is proposed to us. Second thing, I would not say that they failed. I would say they transgressed. They did not listen. But the story is not over. It's not a movie here about Adam and Chava. It's a narrative that began there, and the story continues. We are their children, and we are part of their work. So they continued living. They continued doing what they continued trying their best, and we're continuing the job. Our job is in a progressive flow through all the generations, is to refine this world, a world where you could make mistakes and where mistakes have actually happened, and transform it into a dir b'tachtenim. So Adam and Chava's sin of eating from the tree of knowledge is part of that whole process.
100%.
So
it's so. I'm sorry. Please continue.
no, so that's I mean, now this is what we're discussing now is really overall. It's not necessarily you're saying it's provoked by what we're learning right now, but the overall theme, not necessarily exclusive to Ayin Beis.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll stop here. End of the paragraph, page 1455. Are there any other questions? Anybody wants to ask anything else?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
So, a short while ago, Rabbi, you said that, and you were emphasizing how our physical world is the lowest possible world. And it reminded me of a fundamental teaching of Hasidus that when something falls, the higher it is, the lower it falls. So therefore, can we maybe say that even though we're in the lowest physical world, maybe the source of this physical world comes from something very high. And if we're in the lowest
Absolutely.
possible world,
Answer is yes. Yes.
maybe it's the highest source. Maybe
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That is absolutely correct.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for confirming that.
Okay. So end of paragraph, page 1455, middle of the page.